a Jesus girl. Jesus girl. Hey, it's the diary of a Jesus girl. Let the wings of the Spirit of the Lord just a swirl. You are in it, but you know you're not a part of this world. And for the swine, you should never cast your pearl. Yes, it's just the diary of a Jesus girl. The diary of a Jesus girl.
Welcome to the Diary of a Jesus Girl podcast, where we discuss real-life issues of the committed Christian woman. This podcast will inspire you to love Jesus and impact lives like Jesus. And now it's time for your host, Crystal Day, award-winning author, speaker, and Christian coach.
So, welcome to another episode of the Diary of a Jesus Girl podcast, where we discuss real life issues of the committed Christian woman. Of course, we know that we have these candid conversations where our speakers, our guests have always just been very transparent. They have been inspiring, and the feedback has just been amazing. And as usual, can I say I'm looking forward to this conversation? Yes, I really am looking forward to our conversation with a woman of God. And this week, we're kind of touching on single motherhood, right? So, we have been kind of introduced to it a little bit, but I think it's a conversation that is worthwhile having at this time, because the truth of the matter is there are far more single mother household more than ever in our generation now. And I just believe that this woman of God will be able to just be an inspiration, but also I believe that she will be transparent about her journey. And yes, I want to welcome Miss Sarah Michelle. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. Welcome to the Diary of a Jesus Girl podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So Sarah is the founder. So I've been following her ministry on Instagram for a while. I think I came upon her. She was a contributing author in a book some years ago. Yeah. And that's how I started to follow her. And, her ministry on social media has kind of really been a blessing to me. And I reached out to her to just have this candid conversation about single motherhood. So her ministry, Single Mothers in Christ.
Single Mothers for Christ.
For Christ. Single Mothers for Christ. And she's located in Baltimore, Maryland. So how are things with the whole pandemic in that side of the world now?
Oh my gosh, they're kind of confusing right now. So we are technically in phase 2 of opening, but because coronavirus cases are rising, a lot of states, to include my state, Maryland, is thinking about scaling back a little bit. So we might be going back to quarantine life pretty soon, because it's unfortunate that the cases are not decreasing how they would want it to. I know it has been a change, especially for my daughter. I have an 8-year-old daughter that I take care of alone. So I know it's been a drastic change for her, because as of March 16th, she was no longer in school. She had to do school online. And that was different for both her and mom, because I had to do work online. So I moved to 100% telework, and she moved to 100% school. And we were trying to find out how to balance life without getting on each other's nerves and trying to figure out how we can best help each other. So towards the end, it got smooth. We got into kind of like a schedule where she would do school between a set hours, and then I would kind of let her just freely do whatever she needed to do, because one thing I noticed that it was starting to become a Debbie Downer being in the house all the time. So it was definitely an adjustment period for us. I would have to say that. We're still adjusting. There are still times where I'm still overbooking my calendar because I'm so used to the steady pace. But I can say it did give me a wake-up call as far as, at any time your life could change, and it's important to be adaptable, especially as a single mom. So I really thank God, because during this entire pandemic, I was able to purchase a home. I was able to, get a new job. So it's really been a blessed time. And I really thank God for that. So I would say we haven't had it as bad as some, but I've had try to, at least through my ministry and myself, bless other people as I see that they, may not have had it as easy or as good as probably they see that I do.
Yeah. Yeah, boy, I do understand that, changing the dynamics and trying to manage. Now, start by telling us a little bit about you. Just overall, tell us about you, just start by there and tell us a little bit about the princess.
Yeah, so I started Single Moms for Christ in 2015. God really whispered into my heart to start something for single moms. And I was like, what? I don't want to do that, because I've always been the type where I don't rush to the podium. I don't rush to the mic. I don't want to be seen. I just want to do God's work in the background. But he kind of led me to start this platform, and I could not believe how fast it grew. It's over 3,000 women almost. But I started it because I wanted to bridge the gap between kingdom living and motherhood. And I wanted mothers to understand that single mothers kind of have this stigma where we're looked at as the bad people. We're looked at as, oh, you committed a sin because you had a child out of wedlock, per se. And I wanted to encourage single mothers that in the walk with Christ, we're not here to strive for perfection, but we're here to just do the good works of the Lord and not be sin conscious, but be God conscious. So I actually started that ministry when I was 25 years old, and that my ministry is 5 years old now. And it was started when my daughter was about, she was born in 2012. So she was like 3 or 4 at that time, maybe 2 or 3 or 4. And I remember when she was first born, I really leaned on God. I was in church every day. It was just me by myself. Her biological father decided that, we couldn't co-parent effectively, unfortunately. So he did not participate in co-parenting with me. So it was literally just Reagan and I. And I remember my first apartment was a 2-bedroom apartment in the heart of Southeast DC. And the only thing that I could afford to make and the only thing that I had was spaghetti. So I perfected cooking spaghetti every single day because that was the only thing I had. And I remember even with being in that apartment, a guy broke into my home while my daughter was there and threatened to sexually assault me in front of my daughter. And if I said anything, he threatened to kill my daughter. So that was something that I had to overcome. And then I went back and forth from not having a place to live when I had my daughter. And then eventually I started to settle down and get on common ground and get back into a church. And it was hard. It wasn't easy because when my daughter came, she came less than a year after my son passed away. I had a son that was a stillborn, and he had passed away. So it was really a difficult and tumultuous time for me dealing with the death of my son. And then my daughter was born a month early, and I'm kind of everywhere. But the key for starting Single Moms for Christ is because I wanted single mothers to realize that you do have purpose. That was my premise for starting Single Moms for Christ, is remembering outside of being a mother, outside of sacrificing our being, we do have a purpose. And it's not just being a single mother, it's being who God called us to be and purposed us to be. So, yeah, my daughter is 8 now. Hasn't been an easy road. When she was 3, she was diagnosed with ADHD, and she was getting kicked out of daycares left and right because she didn't know how to control her emotions at that time. And I tell moms with dealing with that, and I also dealt with thyroid cancer. As soon as I had her, I had to go into radiation and to get a thyroidectomy. So it was the first 5 years, me and my daughter really had to buckle down and hold on to each other because we didn't have anything else. People walked out and left me. People who I thought were going to be there to help me take care of my daughter, they said, we can't do this because of her diagnosis. And it was her, her reaction, her emotional reactions were so bad to things that she could no longer even be in a classroom. So it came to, I almost didn't have a job because I had to sacrifice taking care of my daughter or working. So we've definitely Reagan and I have definitely come a long way. She is the apple of my eye. She is my everything. She is totally a mom's girl. But yeah, I that's where I got my start for Single Mothers for Christ.
Well, thank you. I mean, we're just getting started and the story is so interesting already. All right. So normally on the Diary for Jesus Girl podcast, we always start with our signature question. Tell us about your conversion. What was life like before Christ? And how did you come to Christ?
Woo. Life before Christ was hard. I mean, life is not always easy, but it was definitely a lot harder than it should have been. I think for me, I was one of those hard-headed ones. So it took some near-death moments in order for me to really buckle down and understand exactly who Jesus was in my life. I had a very challenging childhood. My mom was also a single mother. So she did a lot of things on her own, had the same kind of track record as me as far as trying to keep a roof over our head by any means necessary. My mom worked 3 jobs. My mom did everything she could to take care of me. And then when my brother came, she did everything she could to take care of both of us. But it was almost as if I lashed out because my parents were not on the best of accords growing up. So they kind of were in and out when it comes to me. Sometimes I would talk to my dad, sometimes I wouldn't. So I really didn't have a set father figure because my dad and my mom, unfortunately, didn't get along. And that came to change in my teenage years. But my teenage years, by that point, I was already just like, not crazy, but I was getting there. I was very, very rebellious. And so at that point, I started to feel like, okay, well, if I don't have a man in my life, then I'm nothing. So I started to turn to men. And unfortunately, when I was 14, I was sexually assaulted by a family member. And then it happened again at 16. So I kind of was in a really dark place because I felt like there was nobody here to love me. And then one day I had always had like this feeling like somebody was steering me in the right direction, but I just didn't know who. Because when I grew up, half of my family were Pentecostal and half of my family were Jehovah's Witnesses. So it was just trying to really see what I stood for and what my belief system was going to be. But when I was 17 years old, I dedicated my life in a very small church in Virginia Beach. And it's still there to this day. And then when I got into a couple of things, got into trouble, and then I decided I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the Army and make my life better. But every step of the way, I can tell you that God has been there. Even when it comes to I've been married twice. Even when it comes to turning to the streets and being promiscuous at one point and leaning on people rather than leaning on God. God has been there every step of the way. He's one of those people who he is not, the person who condemns you, but we all know, as the Bible says, there's no condemnation for those who live through Christ Jesus. So I really stood on that principle because I felt like God welcomed me with open arms. I felt like at one point I had to go to the altar every time I went to church because I was like, God, I got to be doing something wrong to be comfortable living in my sin. But then that's when I found out where it says in 1 Corinthians that bad company corrupts good morals. And that's when God kind of changed the trajectory of my life to be around people that would prompt me to do the right thing, to be around people that would prompt me to go in the right direction. And he kind of put me in a circle in a lifespan to where I would start my trajectory of how I dealt with my life changed. So it wasn't the easiest of lives. I really had to learn through my bumps and bruises, but I really appreciate my bumps and bruises because I felt like God used me as a seed and planted me in the right amount of soil and kept watering me until I grew. So I'm definitely not who and where I used to be. I have a lot of growing to do. especially with my temper and my mouth. But I think when I got saved at 17, that really changed it for me. And I always tell people I've always had a praying grandmother. So no matter what, I remember she used to put oil on me and I didn't understand what she was doing, but she would pray and speak tongues over me. And to this day, I pray over my daughter, and I shake the doorstep, you shake the mat in front of my house I really am prayerful, and that was instilled in me at a young age. So now I'm just like, I'm more so grounded on those principles of prayer and prayer, how prayer changes everything, and how the Bible tells us to pray ceaselessly. And I'm not perfect, but I'm definitely not where I used to be. Even when in 2016, 17, I went back to the altar and I said, I need to kick this thing back in motion, because I've started to slip into the weights and the hinges of sin again. But I just thank God that He's always invited me in with loving arms and been able to show that, you're not perfect, but you're worth it. So that's definitely my story. It's a lot more there, but I won't keep it too long.
Amen. I appreciate that. So, all right. So let's get into the single mother aspect of it, because as you said, there is a kind of feeling of guilt, not just when it comes on to church, but even just overall, as as a career woman, or just overall, there is that kind of. So tell me a little bit about your experience of that almost stigma, whether positive, negative. Tell me a little bit about that experience for you.
Yeah. So for me, I felt guilty because I'm a National Guardsman, so I'm basically a Army reservist. I go and I drill 1 week in a month, and then I go to a regular job. But anybody who's been in the Army, whether it's active duty, National Guard, or Army Reserve, know that it's when you are called to do your job, it is a full-time job. And the Army, it was a great stepping stone for my career, because at this point I'm phasing out, but it is also very, very demanding and very, very challenging. And when they call you, you need to be there in a certain time. And they don't want to hear, unfortunately, that you are a single mom. They expect you to have a family care plan. They expect you to figure it out. And there were times where I couldn't figure it out. There were times where I had to really connect with people that I worked with. I know there was a woman that I worked with, and she really took me by the bootstraps and helped me raise my baby for a number of months, because I was unable to do it. One, from having PTSD from losing my son, and the other because I just couldn't handle it. There was the schedule of the Army. We're called to do civil disturbance, patrols, or we're called to do missions, and I can't always be there for my baby, and I have to leave my baby. So I felt really guilty. I felt for the first 3 years of my life that I was very unavailable to my daughter, and it really hurt me. So coming into when she was 4, 5, and 6, I really blamed myself for when she got diagnosed with ADHD, because I said, had I been more present, she probably wouldn't have had those issues that she had. I really felt guilty about that. I sort of felt like, because of being a single mom, I also felt a lot of weight of being behind. I really, really rushed to get my bachelor's degree, because I wasn't a single mom when I joined the military, but because I didn't do what I was supposed to do, I wound up getting my GED in the 10th grade. So I really felt unaccomplished, even though I had successfully passed through the military and gotten a career, right? As soon as in DC, right as soon as I got out of, basic training, I didn't really feel accomplished. And then when my daughter came, I felt like I had to slow down even more. So in my mind, I took too long with my bachelor's degree. And then as soon as I finished my bachelor's, I was like, okay, I got to get my master's. And I'm 4 classes away from finishing my master's. And I was thinking to myself, I said, okay, I'm going to get my PhD. And I said, who am I impressing? And I think for single moms, the important thing to realize is there is no rush. There is no, because for us, we oftentimes compare ourselves to our friends who don't have kids, and they are able to go out and they're able to travel and they're able to get their degree in like 6 months or 2 years. And we have to balance the baby, cook the food, wash the clothes, tend to the house, tend to our kids. And it's hard for us we actually do the comparison factor. And I really had to tame my mind and train my mind to get myself out of comparing, because comparison is the thief of joy. But the Holy Spirit really whispered to me, and he said, what's the rush? What are you comparing yourself to the ways of the world for? And I said, you know what? So I slowed down. I was supposed to get my master's in March, and COVID happened and things happened. And I said, I slowed down, and I said, I'm gonna take my time. So I'm taking my time, and now October, November, I'll have my master's degree, and that's fine with me. But it's definitely a weight associated with being a single mother, because not only is there a negative connotation with being a single mother, a lot of people think that, well, that's your fault. You did that. And they don't really take into consideration that we didn't have this baby on our own. We didn't sign up and say, hey, I just want to raise a baby on my own. I really thought that I was going to have help, and I didn't. And I tell people I don't negatively speak on Reagan's biological father at all publicly. That was a decision he made, and he wasn't ready. So, but with that, there is no manuals, there is no book, but there is no way for us as moms to say, well, I'm not ready either. We just have to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and say, okay, well, my baby's coming in 6 months, and I have no choice but to get ready. And I also had, like I said, the weight of, I had just lost my son. So I was literally, I had just came off from planning his funeral, packing up his belongings. So I thought I would have a son, and now I'm moving into having a daughter. And it's like a shell shock, because now I don't have anything pink. I have all blue stuff. So it's definitely a negative connotation associated with that. It's also, as far as the Christian community goes, I know growing up, single moms weren't really accepted. It's, oh, you had a child out of wedlock, that means you're having sex. So you can kind of sit back there, and we'll pray for you, but you can kind of sit back there. And it's almost like we had to sit in the back of the church because we weren't really accepted, because they knew what you did, or you popped in church with a belly and you didn't have a ring on your finger, you didn't have a husband. Oh, it's like, we know what you're doing, and we frowned upon that because you're having sex without being married. And so it's just like, you have so many weights, and then you come home and your mind is just, if you don't train your mind can kind of catastrophize those things and be like, well, I'm not worthy. And so that's the premise, like I said, for starting Single Moms for Christ, because I wanted single moms to realize that you are worthy. I know that this happened. I know the situation is not typically ideal, but you are worthy. So the positives is, again, my daughter brings me so much joy. And seeing her grow up, I know yesterday I had insomnia, so I decided to go on Children's Place and just buy her all these clothes because they were having a sale. But like talking about her and seeing her grow up and being like, oh my gosh, I have an 8-year-old and she was a size 12. And things like that, seeing it happen and watching her, like she has an obsession with birds. So listening to an 8-year-old tell you that, oh, mom, that's a blue jay and that's an eagle, and that she's able to, and I try to dig into what my daughter enjoys, because it'll help you kind of learn like who you're raising. But I also said the most important and the positive thing about being a single mom this time around for me is I get to break the generational curse that has happened with prior single moms before me, that happened with my mom, that happened with my grandma. I get to be the curse breaker in my bloodline to say, okay, well, we're not going to negatively raise the baby based on, what we weren't able to do or what we feel like they shouldn't do because we're scared. We're not going to live in fear when we're raising our child. So that's been something that I've gotten given a chance to achieve, letting her play outside, letting her join clubs, letting her be active, letting her exercise her mind, that I wasn't, given the opportunity to do because my mom was unfortunately very worried because I was her only daughter at the time. So it comes with its challenges, but it also comes with its positive attributes too.
I do agree. And you're right, despite sometimes that feeling of guilt or shame or, you probably wanting. And what I love with your conversation or what you shared is that sometimes we don't realize that we are trying to catch up with other people. Yeah. So, like we're doing it, but we're not really stopping and doing that self-check to say, is my motive for doing these things godly, or am I just trying to make
right,
to try to, I agree with that. How do you deal with, as a single mother, balancing having, okay, I have this dream, I believe that God has called me for this purpose, but I do have a child, so do I sacrifice, for example, sending her to a private school versus, let me finish my degree because probably, if I finish my degree, I can afford. So how do you make decisions regarding, purpose, dreams, etc.?
One of the first prayers, when I first started Single Mothers for Christ, one of the first prayers I said, what is my purpose? And that's why I said the premise behind starting Single Mothers for Christ was purpose-based. Because a lot of the times when you are a single mom and you have a baby, you do not know what your purpose is. You don't know. You just know that you have a baby and you're supposed to be doing something, but you don't know what that something is. So a lot of my prayer was, what is my purpose? And I always felt like in my spirit, if I have a dream and I have a vision and it's like it becomes a burning desire, then I take that to the throne. And I feel like God will never give you anything too big or too small for you to achieve, even if it requires you sacrificing. There are some moments where, I have to put my daughter to bed and I have to get on the laptop and study for 2 and 3 hours. There are some moments where, I would do my homework and my daughter would be across the table doing her homework. And I'm trying to do my calculus and she's trying to do her numbers and we're just trying to figure it out together. So there will always be some moments where, but I think a lot of it involves sacrifice. Honestly, it involves a lot of sacrifice. It involves, I really feel like God will never give you a dream that's too big. Because he knows how to put you in it. Especially when it came to explaining to my daughter, I know, for example, I tried to buy a house 3 times. And the 3rd time is when it actually happened. But walking my daughter through those other houses and explaining to her, oh yeah, this will be our house. And then having to come back and explain, no, this can't be our house because mom doesn't make enough right now. But I just felt like, God had something bigger for me. And even in, I want to say 2018, God had started to put it, impress upon my spirit, I have something for you. But oftentimes we have to take the footsteps and we have to, dive into the footprints in order to get to it. And I remember God telling me that, April 2018, my season would end at my current job that I was at. And I was like, how am I supposed to do that? But I kept telling people, I said, I'm not going to be at this job for long. I'm not going to. And in October of that year, God was just like, I understand this is something I told you. I understand how we've wrote the vision, but you also have to do your part too. And I'm a firm believer of when God sees you doing your part, he really expands your territory. So I started applying for jobs and I applied for a job that I had applied to before, but I didn't get hired. And I got hired within like the first month. And that's when it just started. And, but it took a lot of sacrifice. It took a lot of burning the midnight oil. It took a lot of tears. There were times where my daughter would just see me cry. I would pull up in the parking lot and I would just cry because I was so tired. And I remember even before the pandemic happened, like 2 weeks before they closed the schools, I drive 45 minutes to work. I drive 45 minutes back from work. I pick up my daughter. I cook her dinner. And by the time I get into bed, I have to study. And so I remember getting to her school and just being like, I'm so tired. I just need a break. And 2 weeks later, we're both at home with a break. So I'm like, okay, God, I hear you. But I feel like God would always give you the provision to get to the promise. I feel like the P's are necessary, the purpose, the provision, the process, and the promise. They're necessary in order to ordain you to get to where you need to go. And I always tell people it requires a lot of sacrifice. I didn't get here overnight. I tell people, if you see me on Instagram, if you see me on Facebook, I promise you I did not get here overnight. This is prayer, this is process, this is purpose, this is promise, this is a provision, this is all God's doing, because it required a lot of work. My first apartment had mice, and I had to get a cat in order to get the mice out. So it's like now when people see me, they're like, oh my gosh, compared to where you came from 10 years ago, now you own a whole house. So it's crazy because, like, literally, I want to say it's 2020. 12 years ago today, somebody broke in my house that time and tried to sexually harass me. 12 years ago today. So and I know the feeling that goes through people's mind. I've asked this question before. I'm like, God, if you're watching me, if you're protecting me, why are you allowing me to go through these things? And I really think it really allows us to process ourselves. So when we get out of the wilderness, we're humbled enough to say, I went through this and I came out better. I didn't come out bitter. I came out better. Because the one thing that they expect us to be as single mothers is bitter. And I think especially for us as Christian single moms too, because we're getting it from not only the world, but sometimes the church puts that dark cloak on us. That the word of the day is definitely sacrifice and prayer. That's what I would say. That is how I got through it.
Wow, I love that. So in terms of, would you say, if you could have done it differently regarding, just becoming a single mother, is there anything that you look back or you said, oh, I wish I could do differently, that probably would have not led me to be a single mom? Can answer that as part one. And then also I want you to just probably share some encouragement to some young people that possibly listening right now. What advice would you give them in terms of trying to encourage them not to necessarily, what to do, what they could do differently so that they don't come into this path?
If I could do anything different, it would definitely be not going to the situation with my daughter's dad. That would probably have prompted me. It would be because when my son passed away, I really blamed God for that. And I probably shouldn't have, because my son was my second baby to have passed, and I was only 20. So I was very heartbroken because I felt like my womb was cursed, if you will. So with being vulnerable and broken at that time, I allowed myself to just walk into the arms of somebody who wasn't destined for me, didn't have my best interest, didn't want anything from me but to get me in a bed. I definitely would not have became involved with him. And that probably would have prompted me to slow down a little bit. I wish that I would have just slowed down and did not think that my worth lied in the arms of a man. I wish I would have gotten that lesson early. Because I felt, and I actually told this to someone the other day, I think that's why when I felt slight abandonment, because my dad didn't totally abandon me. He just, when him and my mother couldn't get along, he just had to take a pause. So, because of that little slight daddyless daughter thing that I went through, I started to lean on older men as refuge. And I really wish I wouldn't have did that, because it took me through a lot of unnecessary places I didn't need to go to, and necessary wilderness that I didn't need to go through. That, if I don't want to call it a regret, but that probably was, if I would have just slowed down and heard from God and what I needed to be doing. And I love my daughter. I love her past words. But if I would have just slowed down and took some time to hear from God about my next steps and how to heal my heart from losing my son, I probably would have waited and trusted God and trusted his timing. Encouragement, to prevent the teens from being single moms, I would say really, really trust your gut. If you do not feel right about it, if that person is just blowing smoke and you don't really feel comfortable with it, don't do it. I would say pray about everybody. I tell my friends all the time, there is a specific prayer that I pray when people come into my life. And I say, God, if this person is not meant to be there, if I'm not meant to be here, please take them out. And he holds no bars. I promise you, the next day, I pray that prayer, the next day, people are gone. Because God is really invested into who we are through him. So I would definitely say, really take the time to get to know people. Don't rush allowing people into your life, because everybody is not there to plant good seeds. Sometimes people are there to plant seeds based on their own motive, and God looks at the heart. So I would say really take the time to get to know who's in your life. Really take the time to cultivate relationships that are God-based and not just based on physical attraction. Physical attraction does not last. I promise you, it does not last, because when the physical attraction is up, that person has to be able to pour into you when you're empty. I would say that is very important. And also making sure that you know who you are. Because if you don't know who you are, then when people come in, they get the rights to tell you who they think you should be, and you go with that. And then God's like, no, that's not who I want you to be. I want you to be this person. And then you're confused because you're listening to the chatter and you don't know where the chatter is coming from because you can't hear God's voice clearly. So really getting to know who you are in God and who you're purposed to be for what you're purposed to do is important to who will account for being able to come into your life. I think had I known who I was in God, a lot of people that I met in my life wouldn't have been allowed access to me, because they came in and they said, well, I think you should be a lawyer, and I think you should be a doctor, and I think you should do this. And the whole time God is cultivating me, and now I'm a senior finance person at my company, but God was cultivating me to work with numbers. And so we're like, but you wanted me to do this, and I don't think that's going to work. It's turning off the outside noise to figure out, who you are. So I think for me, it was just like not allowing everybody to tell me what they think I should do. And then when you do something against the grain that doesn't go with the narrative that people want for you, don't get discouraged when people start to talk about you. Everybody was like, why are you doing this? And why are you leaving the Army? And I don't think that's smart. But it's something that, when I prayed about it, I said, my heart is just not there anymore to do. And I, wound up, getting a well-paying job where I make twice as much, doing something that no one expected that I would do. And now everybody's like, we're so proud of you. But when I was going through the wilderness and when I was going through the trenches, everybody was like, oh, this is the dumbest idea we've ever seen. What are you doing, Cierra? You don't know what you're doing with your life. So really trusting that when you hear God say something, even when it doesn't look right at that current moment, because I know for a lot of people, for me, they were like, okay, you're saying you're going to get a new job, but where? Like, you're saying you're going to get a house, but where? And it's like when I walked into my house, I was like, this is going to be my house. Pretty sure of it. And I prayed about it, and he's like, yep. And even when it didn't look like it, even when I was going through the trenches and doing the paperwork, it didn't even look like it at one point. And he's like, yep, this is your house. So it's trusting that God is the overseer. He's the driver. He's the pilot of your life. It's just trusting his voice. It's, tuning out everybody else's voice, the chatter. It's knowing your worth so people don't get to tell you who you are. It's denying the wrong people access to you. It's sometimes turning down invitations to go out when you know that this might not be a good look. The invitations to the popular crowd. Sometimes being popular is won't get you to your promise. It'll just polarize it, and you wind up going further and further away from it. But it's realizing that delayed doesn't mean denied. And that's really like the ultimate advice I can give somebody. If it takes you 5 years to get your bachelor's degree, that is just fine, because at least you did it, and at least you know the work that you put into it, and at least you know the sacrifice that you earned.
Wow, there's so many nuggets in what you just said. Right? Like I was trying to, there's so many nuggets, but the one of them that's definitely stood out is when, you just reminded how it's important for us to cultivate a relationship with Christ. I think that for me stood out a lot. Uh, Especially because a lot of young people think that church is about just going to church, and not just young people. A lot of persons think about Christianity as, oh, I go to church, I get baptized, I try to follow these rules, but
Right.
not realizing that Christianity is about having a relationship. So yes, Jesus Christ is
Absolutely.
our Savior, but He's also the Lord of our lives, and He's the one that should be directing our lives. We seek Him through prayer. Okay, Lord, what is your plan? What is your will? What is your desire? And then, yes, you're right. Sometimes it doesn't look like, most times it doesn't look like what the world or what your friends and family would
Yeah.
expect, but another point that came out is know who I am in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That know who I am in Christ. And I would say the same thing regarding, just choosing partners before I had a child. I wasn't necessarily thinking long term. I was just
Right.
looking at, oh, okay, they satisfy me right now. I'm enjoying this right
Yeah.
now, and there is a part that kind of, that optimistic, that you almost feel like, okay, even if it doesn't work out between me and the person, I hope that they would still, try to play their part in terms of core parenting. But there was always a little part that says, you know what, I'm possibly going to be on my own, but you just push that, like, okay, I'm trying to see the best. So, I appreciate that. We're wrapping up, but I want to ask, in terms of dating, do you have what has your experience been like as a Christian woman trying to date, having a child out of wedlock? Do you find that men are, like, it affects how they probably see you? Like, what have your experience been like?
I would say the number one red flag for me when it comes to dating is men that want to move too fast. And I'm just like, yeah, you go on a date with them and they're like, so when do I go to your house? Never, because I have a child there. So I think for me, it's been one of those things where, I desire to be a wife. I had the desire, and that's why I got married twice, but not following God's direction. And I tell people my second marriage was a marriage of disobedience. God had told me not to marry him, and I did it anyway. So I tell people obedience is the watchword when it comes to God. But getting back to dating, it's been interesting because you have to steer clear of people that are already taken. You have to steer clear of people that just want you because of your body. You have to also steer clear for people who have no business in your life because it doesn't even align with God's purpose of your life. It's definitely interesting. I would say, what my daughter is doing. I would say like the first 30 days, if I went on a couple dates in the first 30 days, I'm just like, this is not working. Because especially as a mom, you have to look at, we have to look at the future. We have to look at longevity. Like, are you a good father figure? Do you, it's more than do you have good credit, but it's like that's a factor too. Dating is very taboo as a single mother. You don't want to introduce your kids too soon. You don't want to, confuse them. I'm very big on not allowing like anybody around my daughter. So my daughter does not meet people as soon as I start dating them. But you also have to be careful too, because as a woman, it's just like, you don't want to give your information out too much. And it's one of those things, it's very, very, very taboo. I know going on a few dates, I tell women, especially as a single mom, drive yourself and make sure that, when you leave, you kind of take an alternate route home, take a picture of the person, let people know where you are, drop your location, because you have to be safe. You have to be safe. I take all precautions when I'm going on dates. But it's definitely interesting because I would want to make sure that who I'm dating or who I'm going to date is going to be a good fit for my daughter, especially because now I'm introducing the role of a father to her, and kids of single moms are so used to being there with mom. Yes. So it's like when you introduce a new, it's like, who's this guy? Like, who's this? And then you're trying to fight for attention. And you're like, oh, well, I want my mom. I don't know who you are. So it is definitely, don't rush it. I know sometimes the lonely factor will set in and you'll be lonely and you'll start to feel like, well, I just want somebody. But, that I think when I had my daughter with the wrong person, it really set into me that I was just like, I have to be very, very careful. And I've had bumps and bruises along the way as far as dating and marriage. It hasn't been perfect. But after that, I said I have to be very, very careful with who I allow, and especially with my daughter. Because if you let in somebody dangerous, they can hurt you and your daughter. And you don't want that for either of you or your son. So I would say really take it a step at a time, really pray about that thing and make sure that whoever you are allowing in your life, you really have taken the time to fast and pray about it. And I know for me, I just engulf myself in so much self-work that I don't have time to date. So I'm doing my master's, I'm doing work, I'm doing my daughter's home for the summer. So it's like, and it's also like, be careful, be leery of where you meet people. I know a lot of single moms, we've talked about this. They're like, well, I met him in church and then he turned out to be this rough person. And it's just like, just because you meet him in church don't mean they're because there are a lot of people in church who pretend very well. So it's just like, let the Lord lead you when it comes to it. And patience is a virtue when it comes to dating. And I know people are just like, well, I've been single for 5 years. Patience is a virtue because he might be cultivating your future husband too. Your future husband might need some work. But I would say definitely take your time and pray about it.
Yeah, thank you. So as we close off today, I believe that somebody that's listening will be blessed. I mean, you shared about, just losing a child twice, and the last one, especially, he died, and dealing with that grief period, being married twice and just definitely being disobedient to the Lord. I know having to come back and be repentant and, just realizing more and more that no matter how we fail God, he still continues to be so faithful. And, just having to, as you said, work on me and not work on me because I'm trying to get a man, but work on me because I need to become a better woman in Christ. I need to become that woman after God's own heart, that Jesus girl that is sold out for him and accept his will, however that is, and of course, hoping that, we won't have to do it alone for the rest of our lives. But even so, just remind ourselves that God is a father to the fatherless, and be able to teach our children, our children to have that relationship with God too, Mm-hmm. So I really did enjoy just hearing another single mother's perspective. I could always share mine, but, it's always good to hear somebody else's perspective. And if there are single mothers, or even if you're not a single mother that's listening, it's just also, I hope that you are inspired to realize that, everybody has their own little thing going on, we're all trying to get to that glory land, but there's just so many distractions, sometimes so many things happening. And Cierra has really been so open about, even more than I expected, about some of the struggles that she has had and mistakes, but, just continuing to press into who God has called her to be. So Cierra, is there anything on your heart that you'd want to share with somebody that's listening, just as you're led?
I would say really, I always hear when people be like, well, something told me, really pay attention to the voice. Really take some time. If you're a single mom, especially, we don't have a lot of time. So oftentimes I will wake up before my daughter and I will just hear what God has to say. But really take some time and really listen and journal and take some time for you. I think the most important piece of advice I can give is for single moms, please take some time for you. Please network with people that you trust to, hey, can you watch my baby for a couple hours so I can go to the grocery store and go get my feet done? It is important because I notice when you constantly run and take care of your child, you will exhaust your tank. You will. It is super important to take some time for you. I try to once a week, even if I come downstairs and have some coffee before my daughter wakes up. The peace and quiet that you get is just so healthy because when you are not putting your best foot forward and when you're on empty, you're going to give your child empty too. And they don't really deserve that. So making sure that we're able to put our best foot forward, fill up our tank, because we can't pour from an empty cup. Neither can we exhaust, an empty well. So it's important for us to really replenish and get some alone time with God and get on our face and put some things on the altar. And it's really, really important to pray and ask God, about your circumstances and ask God about, hey, God, I want to build a factory. What do I need to do? But I think the last thing I would say is nothing is too big for God. So if God is putting a dream in your heart for you to do, and you feel like I don't have the money to do it, I don't have the people to do it, just depend on him. I have watched him do things in the last 90 days and I'm still shocked. Just depend on him and be blessed in knowing that praying ceaselessly and the fruits of your labor will definitely prosper.
Oh, thanks. I was just about to close, but there's a question that came to mind I really want to ask. How do we, and I know it's not single mothers alone struggle with it, you find that especially women, though, tend to let their kids become an idol. And it's not intentional, but I can picture some friends of mine where it's almost like their life just revolve around this child, and I understand that, you love your child, but then also we have to remind ourselves that God, we are just a steward, they don't belong to us, and when it came up because you mentioned the self-care and you find that it's almost like if I'm not the one that is taking them to this and I'm not the one, I can't ask for help, so how do you kind of ensure that you're loving your child as best as you can, but not making them an idol?
You do the best you can. And I think with that, you have to, because a part of that too is not enabling our kids. And I think that's something the military probably taught me, because I let my daughter do a lot of things on her own. We're in the killing bugs phase and she's scared to death, but I have to, train her to do that because, it allows me to see that she's building her tolerance, she's growing up. And, the Bible tells us train a child in the way they should go, so when they grow, they won't depart from it. And you don't want to train a child so much that they just feel like, okay, I have a problem, let me call mom. I have a problem. We need to train our child to, hey, you have a problem, go to the throne, think about it. And if you really can't figure it out, then you call me. But I think it's important because a lot of times moms feel like, and it has a lot to do with how you were raised too. I know when my daughter and we started getting adjusted to each other, it was, okay, well, I can't trust anybody. And even I had that thought recently because I don't think a lot of moms think about, well, if we depart from this earth today, who is going to take care of our child? And that's something we really had to think about. And I was sitting here a couple weeks ago in my office going through a will template. Just like, okay, well, what happens if I leave? We don't know the day or the hour. So I think it's really just like putting the processes in place. And that's why I always use the word, especially in my corporate world, but process improvement is important. Putting the processes in place because you're not going to be there all the time. And I think, unfortunately, we know that time is an essence of man, but it's still, we don't know the day or the hour. So we wouldn't do a due diligence to ourselves to not prepare our children to not be here without us. And that is where I think we have to make sure that we're not, okay, well, I have to be here every second, every hour, and every minute of the day. We can't physically do that, because when God's ready for us to go home, we can't say, okay, one more second. We can't do that. We have to abide in him and go home. So I think it's just important too that we also find what makes us tick too. Find something that you enjoy. Do you enjoy reading a book? Do you enjoy web design? Do you want to do a new hobby? I know I just recently picked up a new hobby of becoming like a lash affiliate for a lash company. And it's something that I can get to play with on my own, to have my own time. But it's not fair to you as a mom to not give yourself the time that you need. Because as kids get older, I don't know how, about you, but when kids get older, they don't want to really be bothered with us that much. I know there are some moments where my daughter's like, I just want some time to myself. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? So I think it's just being able to trust that, God was going to bring the right people in our life. I have a very, very good village. She has her godmom. She has my dad. She has my mom. She has my stepmom, my aunt. I have a really good village now. So if I'm depleted, I'll say, okay, dad, mom, god sister, can somebody please watch Reagan for a weekend, for an hour, and they'll say, hey, yeah, because they don't do it all the time and they understand. But having that support system, even when you don't have a support system, you can build it. I don't have immediate family here in Maryland. Everybody is at least an hour to 2 hours away. So if something has to happen where I need something immediately, then sometimes I have to say, okay, well, let me put my daughter down for a nap. But it's just recognizing that, our kids are not going to always have us. So give them the processes, give them the systems and put them in place so they know how to operate without us, so that they're not growing up saying, dang, I don't know how to change a tire because mom didn't show me. So yeah. I think it's important that, we just, our kids are the apple of our eye, but they have to grow up. It's just a hard seed that we have to swallow. They have to grow up.
Yeah. And then also, just as you spoke, it just remind me that it's so important that we ensure that God is the throne of our lives, So yeah, but he is the throne. He is in charge of our lives, and we can't do this on our own. We shouldn't try to do it on our own. We should partner with him to do it, because at the end of the day, he knows the plans that he has for them,
Right.
And sometimes as parents, we like, oh, you must do this, you must do that. Hello, is that what God says?
Exactly.
Is that what God says? So I thank you for this conversation, Cierra. Just tell us how they can find you. I'll leave a link in the show notes to the Instagram and website for single moms. Is there any other way that we can connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram as Cierra, ERRA Michelle, 2 L's. And I'm also on Facebook as Cierra Michelle. I am on Instagram. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Single Mothers for Christ. We actually have our website, singlemothersforchrist.com, and we have blogs. We're actually going to be relaunching the blog this fall. We have blogs, and we have actually learning tools so that we actually partner with a company that is going to give us free resources to give so we can have learning tools for our babies over the summer. We're going to be in July and August launching a program for single moms that called Kids Still Eat. And that program basically helps single moms replenish their pantries in the summertime, because I know a lot of kids are home right now. So we just want to make sure that kids have enough food and their parents are able to get them the food that they need. So we're going to be starting that in July and August. And then once August kicks off, we're going to be stuffing the book bags again. So we're going to be stuffing 100 book bags from each major city. And my goal is to go to DC, Maryland, and Virginia and stuff 100 book bags from each major city so that kids can have the school supplies they need to start school. If they'll be starting school back, because I don't know what this pandemic is going to hold for us. but I at least want the parents to worry about one less thing. So we do definitely have a lot of things coming up, but make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Those are our two main channels at Single Mothers for Christ, FOR.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure getting to know you, just admiring the brand from afar. And yes, that's it for another episode of the Diary of a Jesus Girl podcast. I don't know about you, but I know that I was truly blessed by this conversation. Sarah was just real, and she just fell into the culture of the Diary of a Jesus Girl, just knowing to be led by Christ in what she has said. And I believe that somebody will be inspired by, just her testimony and just her knowledge and wisdom that she has shared with us today. So remember to leave a review, remember to subscribe, remember to share with, other single women, other persons at, this podcast. And let us continue to just love Jesus and impact like Jesus. And Sarah, thank you for the amazing work. Despite all that you're doing, you still find time. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why I reached out, because so many times as single mothers, especially, there's the excuse to say, I don't have time to do anything else but my child. But you're saying, I'm doing my master's, I'm still a career woman. And yes, it is not always easy, but I still have a purpose for my life. God still has a purpose. He can use me, can use my story and to be a blessing to somebody. And I really do hope that somebody that's listening is inspired to also seek the Lord for your purpose. So God bless you. I'll see you guys next week.
Diary of a Jesus girl. Jesus girl. Hey, it's the diary of a Jesus girl.